Imagine it is 1942. The world is on fire, but the most important battle isn't happening on a field in Russia or a beach in the Pacific. It's happening in the cold, black voids of the North Atlantic. Britain is an island under siege, a throat being slowly squeezed shut. Every day the horizon is filled with the smoke of burning merchant ships. Hitler's U-boat wolf packs are winning. They aren't just sinking ships, they are sinking the hope of the Allied cause. The problem was simple and terrifying: the Atlantic Gap. There was a massive stretch of ocean in the middle of the Atlantic that Allied planes couldn't reach. It was a playground for German submarines. If you were a sailor in that gap, you were a sitting duck. Britain needed a giant lily pad in the middle of the ocean, a floating air base where planes could refuel and hunt submarines. But there was a catch. Steel was more precious than gold. Every ounce of metal was already promised to tanks, Spitfires, and bullets. The British Empire was running out of the very material it needed to survive. They needed a miracle, and they needed it to be made of something that didn't cost a penny. The mad scientist, Geoffrey Pyke. To the British military establishment, Pyke was a nightmare. He didn't wear a uniform, he wore rumpled suits and had a wild beard. He was a polymath, a man who looked at the world and saw solutions where others saw dead ends. He was a favorite of Lord Mountbatten, who loved wild ideas. Pyke sat in his office, surrounded by maps of the freezing Atlantic, and asked a question that sounded like a joke. Why don't we just use ice? Ice is free. Ice floats. Ice is everywhere in the North Atlantic. Pyke's original vision was to find a massive iceberg, level off the top, and stick some engines on the side. It was a brilliant, insane plan. But as any child with an ice cube knows, ice has two fatal flaws. It shatters like glass when hit, and it melts. If a German torpedo hit a natural iceberg, the whole structure could crack and disintegrate. Pyke needed to change the very nature of water itself. He needed to turn ice into armor. The invention of Pykrete. Pyke began experimenting in a secret sub-zero laboratory hidden under the Smithfield Meat Market in London. Working in the dead of night, surrounded by hanging carcasses of beef, Pyke and his team began mixing water with different materials. They tried everything, but then they hit the jackpot. They mixed water with 14% wood pulp, the same stuff used to make paper, and froze it. The result was a substance they named Pykrete. It was a revelation. When you freeze wood pulp into ice, the fibers create a structural mesh, similar to how steel rebar works in concrete. Suddenly, the ice wasn't brittle anymore. It was incredibly tough. You could hit it with a sledgehammer and the hammer would bounce off. You could shoot it with a rifle and the bullet would flatten against the surface. Even better, because of the insulating properties of the wood pulp, Pykrete melted at a fraction of the speed of regular ice. Geoffrey Pyke hadn't just made a new material, he had created the ice of war. The secret meeting. Named after a prophet in the Bible who said, "I will work a work in your days which ye will not believe." To get the project approved, Lord Mountbatten had to convince the most powerful man in the world, Winston Churchill. The scene was Churchill's steaming hot bathroom at Chequers. Churchill was in the tub smoking a cigar when Mountbatten burst in and dropped a chunk of Pykrete into the hot water to show it wouldn't melt. But the real test happened later at the Quebec conference, in a room full of the highest-ranking generals and admirals. Mountbatten walked in with two blocks of ice. One was pure, clear ice. The other was a brownish, ugly block of Pykrete. He took out a service pistol. The room went silent. He fired a shot into the regular ice. Then he turned the gun on Pykrete. He pulled the trigger. The bullet didn't break the ice. It ricocheted off the surface, zipped across the room, and supposedly grazed the pant leg of an admiral. The message was clear. This mud ice was bulletproof, it was bomb-proof, and it was ready to go to war. In 1943, Construction began in a remote Canadian mountain lake. Engineers faced problems that no human had ever encountered. The first challenge was cutting Pykrete into giant blocks. Standard saws were useless against the tough wood fibers. They built massive heated saws to slice through the ice. The second problem was the massive weight of the ship. The structure was so heavy it started to slowly deform. The ice began to flow like a frozen, slow-motion river. To stop this, they installed a complex cooling system. They nicknamed this network of freezing pipes the ice worm. Thousands of miles of steel tubing were needed for pipes, but steel was still required for tanks and frontline weapons. The cost of the project was spiraling out of control. One single ship would cost more than a whole fleet. Meanwhile, the technology of war was changing very fast. New long-range planes finally reached the mid-Atlantic gap. The Black Pit was closing without needing ice ships. U-boats were finally being hunted down by new radar tech. The strategic need for a floating island slowly vanished. In late 1943, the British military pulled the plug. Project Habakkuk was officially canceled and left to melt. The prototype took 3 whole summers to completely disappear. Pyke's grand dream became a footnote in military history. It remains the largest ship that was never truly built.